Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my usual broadcast partner, former NHL defenseman Tom Laidlaw, who played for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. This is the Laidlaw and Allen Report. And, it's his Ranger affiliation that's important today because our special guest is another former Ranger player, Dave Maloney. And the reason why I'm happy to have two former players and former Rangers on the show today is that we're going to talk about what the New York Rangers did recently after Tom Wilson did what he did on the ice. And Dave, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. It's nice to chat with you and Tom, as usual, talk a little hockey. And yeah, it's kind of a unique situation to discuss, really.
Yeah, poor Dave is usually on here on Thursday with the other three Mudheads, so it's a little bit short.
Tom, I don't know whether you have the statement up on your machine or whether you could get it up because we should probably read it, but I don't have any internet today. But Dave, what I find interesting is, and Tom will read it shortly, but the statement basically came out and said that the Department of Public Safety really didn't handle the situation involving Tom Wilson very well. They actually called for George Peros to be fired. And, even though they're going against the grain here of what's usually expected from teams, if you look on social media, they're being praised left and right for standing up, for this principle, which is Tom Wilson was out of hand and he faced no repercussion for it. What are your thoughts on what Tom Wilson did and how the Rangers reacted?
Well, there's a couple of things, Kevin. First of all, I do radio and television for the Rangers, so I've had to think long and hard about being a biased opiner, if you will.
Yeah.
So I got to thinking, well, if this happened to Johnny Gaudreau, or if it happened to Mitch Marner, or if it happened to any of the smaller statured, let alone a guy like McDavid, because I put Panarin in that group. Panarin, so from the standpoint, so at the end of the day, I think the Rangers, John Davidson's a hockey guy. Jeff Burton's a hockey guy. Chris Drury's a hockey guy. These aren't business guys that have bought a franchise or something and are now making a statement about our game. These are hockey guys. And hockey guys know when somebody's crossed the line. And I think Tom Wilson, even Xing out his past, but you can't X out his past in considering what was done. I think it was borderline criminal. I think that the play that set it all up was a basic hockey play where Buchnevich is driving the net. The Rangers are on a power play. Buchnevich is driving the net. There's commotion there. The referee's right behind, so the puck's still alive. He takes a while before he blows the whistle. So Buchnevich continues to jam the goaltender. Then Wilson comes in, and really when you look at the various stages along the way, it's Wilson the whole time along that precipitates what happened, let alone the ending where he takes a guy where now the league, I listen to the NHL Network on the ride in on to the game, my radio, talking about how they have to protect the elite players in the league. And I can buy into that. The league treats the elite players differently. They're paid differently. There's every reason to believe that they should be treated differently. And here you get a guy, ragdolls him around, throws him down, and not nothing. $5,000 fine. Tom Wilson spent $5,000 in the first 5 minutes of his celebration when they won the cup. So come on. So I think at the end of the day, I had the opportunity to talk to JD yesterday because my thought, when you don't hear anything, you go, uh-oh, this is the league. There's going to be nothing come out of this thing. And I applaud the Rangers once again for doing the thing. And these are hockey guys commenting on a sport that's near and dear to all of us, on a behavior for a guy that at the end of the day, and I was mentioning to Tom, I lasted this long running monologue here. For me personally, I'm going to stop saying that every team would like Tom Wilson on their team. That's enough. We can't enable a person that literally could cross the line and has shown every evidence that he's that close to the line to seriously hurting someone. So where it goes from here, as far as the league and the Rangers are concerned, Panarin's done for the season. I just think it's a sad, it's another sad comment when we'd like to think our game is progressing.
So here's our Ranger statement.
Yeah,
the New York Rangers are extremely disappointed that Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these types of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and their Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing this season. We view this as a dereliction of duty by the NHL head of player safety, George Parros, and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. Pretty strong statement, right? I mean, it's and obviously to make that statement from the Rangers side, you don't do that just out of emotion. You put some thought into what you've written there. So obviously, they're you can't argue. I guess to go to the length that George Parros is not fit for his job, then that's a pretty strong statement.
That's what struck me about that statement. If they had come out and just said, "Hey, look, they should have done something here," and they didn't do it, that would have been one level of complaint. But this is a protest all the way to the point where they said, "Look, you got to remove the guy from office." But having both you guys here, I want to get your thoughts on what bothered me the most about what happened, and that is that when you're in those situations, like most guys, they're elite level athletes. Like when fans say all the time, "Well, he didn't have time to react," and all that. Well, the reason you're elite athletes is you do have reactions that are quicker than everyone else's, and you do understand your abilities and everything else. And I was just severely bothered by the cruelty and the viciousness of what he did. Like Tom Wilson was keenly aware that Panarin was vulnerable. He knew who he had for sure, and yet he continued on and slammed him, like knowing that the potential for injury was there. And that's what bothered me. And then for the league to say, that was, and they didn't say this officially, but they let it, the reason why they didn't give him a suspension, they let it come out in the form of, well, we felt that the Panarin incident was kind of a wrestling match that occurs all the time in a course of a game. Well, that's true, it does, but not the viciousness that we saw on that play. You don't see guys, slamming guys to the ice like that and then bouncing them off the ice. I just thought that alone was enough to warrant a suspension.
Well, especially when Wilson's got the history of trying to hurt people. Like that last suspension he got, where he got a 7-game suspension, that was a clear effort he could change his path. He could have kept his elbows down. He tried to hurt the Boston player. There was no question about it. Went after his head. So that's the thing. You could argue, I guess you could argue somewhat, that if it was the first time something like that happened, you could say, okay, he lost his temper or whatever. But in this case, this is a player that has proven he just doesn't care about the other players. Dave and I were talking before the show, when we played, we played hard, and you were taught to, like, if you had a chance to hit somebody, you hit them hard. But most guys, I think, didn't try to hurt the other guy. You wanted to stop him. You wanted to intimidate him, not let him play his game, but to intentionally hurt him like that. And that's the part with me. And again, we were talking. You watch Washington play against Vegas with Ryan Reeves there. Wilson doesn't play that same way, and that's the part. That's cowardly, right? I mean, if you want to play hard and tough, go do it. I mean, the Clark Gillies played the same way against everybody when he played. Nick Fotiu played the same way against everybody when he played. For Wilson to act tough against the Rangers, who clearly aren't that kind of team, that's the part for me that as a player, you'd like to grab the guy and smack him around, right? So,
well, to your point, Kevin, for me also, I think it's scary to think that he knew who he was and continued to do it. And it's even scarier if there was an argument where he blacked out and didn't know who he was doing. I mean, there's really no there's just no rational, because it's an irrational act. There's no rational way to understand what in the world was going through his head. And I just think that he's an outlier on a number of fronts, Wilson. There's been no other player of that style that would be out killing a penalty in the history of the league. You know, he can play with Ovechkin. He can play with Kuznetsov. Those are all those things. But at a certain point, it does not excuse what ultimately he's done. And let's not forget, he had a suspension rescinded from 20 games down to whatever the commissioner
14, yeah.
14.
Yeah.
I mean, and then at the end of the day, what would the league have had to lose by suspending him for a game, say, or whatever? What in the world do they think they were gaining by not even acknowledging what he did to Panarin? I just don't get it.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
What was the message? You know, generally in those situations, I've covered the league a long time. You know, the truth is somewhere in the middle. You always have people who say he should be banned for life, and other people that, you know, Capitals fans were saying, well, this was just hockey, and, you know, things boil over and blah, blah, blah. And usually it's in the middle. Well, the middle is not a fine. Like, the middle would have been, you know, an 8-game suspension or a 10-game suspension, or, you know, and then the extreme end would have been another 20-gamer that, you know, he would have appealed. But, you know, like, I think the fans always get a little carried away, but it's the hockey people that are upset about this. I mean,
Right.
Dave's point about hockey people sending that letter, and a guy like John Davidson, who's respected league-wide as not just a hockey guy, but a guy that really knows, you know, what he's doing, and always well-spoken, tries to do the right thing. You know, for him to do that, I think just sends a message. And always when players go in for these hearings, the first thing they always say is, you know, I'm not that kind of player. Well, Tom Wilson is that kind of player.
Right.
Like he can't say that. He's been suspended 30 games in his career already. 30 games. Like, that's almost half a season that he's been suspended. Like, you know, something needs to be done. And, you know, as long as he's going to get off, like, I would have bet, and tell me if I'm wrong, guys, because you played the game. When Tom Wilson left the arena, he thought he was going to be suspended.
Oh, I would think so.
I just can't imagine he didn't think he was headed for a suspension.
Yeah, that would be scary to think. Be another thing. I honest to God, hope he would have thought that way, because if he had left the ring and said, you know, the preening and the emotion of him going to the box, you know, I get, you know, maybe I get that because you're still emotionally attached to the event. But when you've had a chance to sit in the room and think after, oh my God, Artemi Panarin? Yeah, you know,
yeah, like, you got to think what his teammates are saying to him too. Like, how can you respect a player that does that kind of stuff to Artemi Panarin, right?
Well, that's the thing. You know, Tom and I were talking before, and I've had this thought before, is that at some point the onus is also on the franchise.
Yeah.
Say, you know what, this guy's done a lot for us, but that's enough. Like, to Peter Laviolette to have to say it's just a scrum.
Oh,
Peter, come on. You know, you're a hockey. Come on. At least it's a scrum that get out of hand, and we have the responsibility of not having scrums get out of hand in that situation. Somebody has to take the step forward and say, we all agree that this guy could be on every team, and we all think that this guy is an outlier, but we all now believe that he's crossed the line.
And do you guys think, I know that they're calling for George Parros to be fired, the Rangers, and I understand that from their side. But up until this point, don't you think they've done a pretty good job of suspending players?
Well, for me personally, I never, ever pass judgment on, because it's such a subjective thing, and you are not in – I've never been privy to how that plays out. I always like they explain the video, explain what happened, explain, and then say, okay, the suspension's 3 games. You're like, oh, okay, but, you know, whatever. So for me personally, I've never ever debated the term or whatever, because it's just so subjective to the ultimate judgment. And I do think that, you know, there are boards The game is fast. There is always going to be a role for a player's a committee. It's a physical, violent game. Yeah, I didn't want to use that word violent, but it is. It can get violent, and so I think there will always be a role. But this to me baffles. It just baffles that, like I say, he spent $5,000 in the first 5 minutes of the Stanley Cup celebration when they won in 2018. So that's nothing. I mean,
Thomas, first of all, it's good to see your compassionate side come out, thinking about George Parros. But I think that's a great point, Tom, because I think for the most part, on the run of the mill, and most of the suspensions it's guys, as Tom alluded to before, guys just boil over at the wrong time. They're not those kind of players. But it's a heated game, it's a passionate game, and a boil over. And for the most part, they get those kind right. Where they've always had trouble, and I don't care who's been in that office, and it's a thankless job. It's impossible almost to get it where you're going to make everybody happy. You're usually going to make no one happy. But saying all that, I think when they've had these big events, when a message needs to be set, a tone needs to be set, that's where they've had difficulty. And I don't say it's easy, but in this one they're so far off. I mean, so far off. I think that this requires, I think, at least an explanation from the league. It'll probably come at the GM's meeting. The next GM's meeting they have, because this is going to be brought up, and I'm sure George Parros will be brought in to kind of discuss and walk everyone through his thought process. But there's more than just one team out there that's upset about the way this was handled, and because of that, I think there's probably going to be a review of how they sort of do these kind of things. I think at the very least they should at least think, okay, are we doing the right thing here? How do we approach these?
Kevin, do you really think so? If we believe that they've done a pretty good job to this point, and this is just an isolated incident, do they rehaul the whole system?
Well, no, I'll tell you. I'm sorry, Kevin. For me, I know the commissioner jumped in to rescind one suspension for the guy. Right. Now, so there has been precedent for the commissioner saying, okay, that's whatever the appeal process was, how that worked, however he got you, that he ultimately decided to rescind part of a sentence. To me, it's another time, okay, there are always going to be consequences of anyone's decision, right? And there's going to be a reaction to this particular decision by George Parros. And far be it from me, I have yet to hear this morning, that there's a wholehearted agreement that this was judged correctly. Or so I just think that.
Just to clarify, Tom, like I think that they get it right or do the best they can with the normal. But we always have these type of incidents come up where there's a lot of attention, the spotlight is on them, and I think that's where we will find the difficulty. And I do think, I don't know whether anything will change, but I'm saying is I bet there'll be a review of, I'm sure George Parros has had to explain to Gary Bettman what was your thought process on this, because obviously Bettman is going to have to go to the Board of Governors meetings, and owners are going to bring this up. The Rangers are going to stand up and say, Gary, explain yourself, explain the league's position on this, because this isn't going to die. You don't make that kind of statement, and we're all assuming that the Rangers will be fined because this goes against their code. You don't criticize the league, so there'll be some fine, I'm sure, on this. Well, at the next Board of Governors meeting, so I'm sure there's going to be a review of it. Now, I don't have any idea whether there's going to be any changes, and as I said, I'm sympathetic to the idea. It's hard, but where I have trouble with their decisions is always in these major ones where people are looking for. It's almost like a Supreme Court thing when they make a ruling. It has an impact on everything. Well, when they make a ruling in this kind of thing, I think it can have an impact. Like, does this say that people can go out and act like Tom Wilson and not, have any? I don't think they will, but it could mean that. So I think this is an important situation, and I think they do have to kind of review what's going on. And I also think it's time for some measure of intervention with Tom Wilson from the Capitals, from the Players Association, just to say, hey, Tom, maybe it's time for you to go and figure out why your behavior is like this. Do you need counseling, some form of therapy? Do you just need to sort of sit and figure out why, you can't control yourself? Because, Dave made a good point. Like, this is a violent game, but it's supposed to be a controlled violence, and there's no control with Tom.
What's interesting is the one bad boy of the league, not a generation back, who got suspended and was asked to go to anger management, was Sean Avery. And Avery never got suspended for anything on ice. It was all off ice stuff. So there's obviously been a precedent there where a guy, let alone, it had nothing to do with his game. This is clearly an on ice issue where there's no question. And I think it comes down to, once again, if he knew it was Panarin, okay, that's wrong. And if he didn't know it was Panarin, that's even worse. I didn't know who it was. I said, okay, dude,
that's the best point of the day.
We need you to get in and see someone, because this is not only is it bad for our league, you could kill somebody. not hopefully not literally, but I mean it's just again, it's just, to me, and I do obviously right from the get-go, I'm probably more emotionally attached to this one because it is arguably the Rangers' best player. And I heard a discussion yesterday. Well, it turned the game. The Caps were down at the time, and it turned the game. Yeah, well, it turned the game because Panarin could no longer play. So the Rangers' best offensive player, who had the leading scorer against the Caps in the season series, goes, so I don't want to hear this change the game. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's been handled wrong. And what happens from here remains to be seen from my point of view.
Hey, Dave, I know you've got to run. Just one real quick question. Are they bringing that tough kid up from Hartford?
Not that I've heard. They have one more recall. And again, the Rangers, I don't believe, are skating this morning. They practiced yesterday. He was not there yesterday. But again, it's the same thing. So, okay, I beat up. See, that's the other thing. And then they talk about the Bruins, right? Bruins franchise being a hard franchise and a tough franchise, and they get, an eye for an eye. Well, that didn't protect Carlo.
Yeah.
And that this whole eye for eye thing where the Rangers have to now stand up, it's enough of that nonsense. Let's get over that, because I don't know about you, Tom. I talk to these young guys and tell them some of the things, how the game was played when they look at you cross-eyed, like, what? What are you talking about? You guys played that way?
Yeah.
So I just think the league's better. They've done a really good job of being better. The marketing's good. To watch it on the game. The league has done itself a disservice, I believe, by how this thing has played out.
All right, we got to let you run there, Dave. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Kevin, it's good to chat. Good luck. Keep up the good work, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. That was Dave Maloney, obviously ex-Ranger and a member of the broadcast team on radio and television for the Rangers. And Tom, really good insight. This is the benefit of having ex-players. You guys, have an ability to that the rest of us don't. You've been inside those. You've been in battles that have boiled over. You know what happens. But I'm assuming you didn't see guys act the way Wilson did very often.
Well, especially when it's a big, tough guy. I saw Dave Brown cross-check Thomas Sandstrom in the head and got 10-game suspension for it. Dave Brown had proven how tough he was. Part of the issue was that Thomas wasn't much of a fighter, so I think Brown felt like that was the only way he was going to be able to get him. But still wrong. I mean, that was a vicious play against a player that wasn't even prepared for that at all. So it's the same thing this last night, or the other night with Wilson. That's the part for me. It's like, and you're right, the league got it wrong. There's no question about it. But from a player's standpoint, that's like to be on his team, like to sit in the locker room with him. Now, I'd be looking at him like if my teammate did that, I'd go, really? Panarin? Like, you're a tough guy and you threw Panarin around like that? Just to me, that doesn't prove anything. That doesn't and that doesn't help our team in any way. It doesn't make us Stanley Cup champion. It's just to me, it's a totally selfish play. And Dave is right in saying this. We got to stop saying that we'd love to have him on our team, but he still is he's a great player. There's no way around it. Wilson is. It's just like that's just a totally selfish play for everybody, for his team, for himself, for the league. That's the problem.
Yeah. There's other things going on in the league. Well, one other point about Wilson that should be lost is, and I thought Dave's point about let's stop saying that every team in the NHL would love to have Wilson. But this is what I would say about that. What's just so sad about all this is that Wilson doesn't need to act like this to be an effective player. He may think he does. But imagine if he just was a power forward who bangs people within the boundaries of the rules and, scored like he's got 13.
Yeah, totally. So we lost Kevin there with his reception. But one of the things that's being brought up by a lot of the Ranger fans, and I understand it totally, is why can't they bring up some tougher guys and be a more physical team? Now, I think you have to remember, and JD and Jeff Gordon know what they're doing. There's no question about it. They are developing a team here. They got these young players, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they need to be in the lineup playing. And if you're going to bring in some tough guys, first of all, there isn't too many tough guys around anymore. I mean, there's the Kachuk brothers, there's Ryan Reeves, I guess Matt Martin, but they're not like, you can't have guys like in the old days that are on the lineup that can't play, but they're just tough guys. It's just, you can't afford to do that in today's game. The rules have changed too much, the speed of the game. Teams just aren't structured that way anymore. Back when we played in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you had the tough guys in the lineup to battle the other tough guys in the other lineup. So the Rangers are doing what they need to do right now. They're having spots in the lineup for young kids so they can develop. They know, not unlike what Toronto is doing right now, that once they get to the point where they're a real contender, yes, they need to add some more physical players, but they have to be able to play. It can't be just, we can't overreact, because again, most teams in the NHL don't have those kinds of lineup. They don't have the Tom Wilsons. Again, there's the Ryan Reeves in Vegas, but like generally he plays by a little bit more of a code. Like I don't think he would do to Panarin what Tom Wilson did. So again, you can't overreact as an organization because of one player and one incident, but they do, as these players mature, they do need to take control of their team a little bit more. The Lafreniere, supposedly he's a real character guy, but again, he's 18, 19 years old. He's just trying to find his way through the league. So to expect those young kids to step up and do it. And again, the leaders of the team, Panarin jumped in to help. He really should not be doing it, but you got to admire him for doing it to help his teammate. And Zibanejad's the other star player on the team that's just not his game at all. So listen, the Rangers, we don't want to see the Rangers getting pushed around like that, but they're doing what they need to do to develop this team, and they will be a team to win, and to win in the NHL level, not unlike St. Louis and Washington and Tampa. You have to be a physically strong team. You don't have to be fighting all the time, but you need to be team tough. And the Rangers, they will get there, and they're doing what they need to do right now. So, all right, guys, thanks for being on board. Sorry we lost Kevin there. And again, if you want to listen to the radio version of this show, you can go to radio.co at 365 Sports. That's radio.co at 365 Sports. You can follow Kevin on hockeybuzz.com. And then he's got his podcast with Bob Duff that they do. I think it's every Tuesday and Thursday as well. So big thanks to Dave Maloney for coming on. And we will see everybody next week. Well, we're going to see us tomorrow on the Thursday show, but we'll see Kevin back on Thursday or on next week. See you guys.